Mopfreds! Can I tell you about the coolest armor model you've never built? Allow me to introduce a 3D printed 1/48 scale KV-4 KTTS heavy breakthrough tank proposal from the very early years of World War II. You might know this one from World of Tanks, and I remember back in the day when I was on a call with Adam Walder, he told me that I should scratch build one using a couple of Trumpeter KV-1 kits as part donors. The kit has just a few pieces, but it comes with all of the nuances of 3D printed models. So let's first see how to tackle the material, and then I'll tell you about the kit itself. First of all is cleanup. I already removed the printing support before I cured the parts. Resin can be only assembled with superglue, and we'll use that to our advantage here because it can also act as a filler. All of those dimples are left by the supports, and it's one of the nuances of 3D printing that's just unavoidable. We can only place them somewhere out of sight and just hope for the best. I also experienced a few minor layer shifts during the printing, but they were nothing serious and those visible lines were easily removed with a bit of sanding. Once I was done with the messy bits, I added heavy steel texture on the thick armor plates. This is my standard mixture of Tamiya Grey Putty diluted with Mr. Cement S. On 3D kits, printing lines can be sometimes visible, and we can use this concoction to smooth them out. Resin is actually quite malleable, so we can easily add flame cut marks to it, such as on the side of this mantlet. We just can't soften the cuts with modeling cement like we do on plastic kits, but instead we can flood the area with diluted Tamiya putty. At this point, I could attach the main armament and smoothen things out. With armor texture, it's always a good idea to polish it a little with a fine sponge. The original kit comes with grab handles, but I requested the files without them, so I could make my own from 0.3mm wire, which is sturdier, and I can feel better because I modified at least some parts of the model. And that pretty much sums up all the steps I took on this model. So let's now talk about the kit while I assemble the hull. So the model is from an upcoming startup company from Slovakia called Weekend Models. Calling it a garage company would be a stretch, because at this point it's more of a college dorm company, and is run by two talented young lads, Peter and Michael. Peter is the 3D modeler, and we've been chatting for a while. One day, he asked me what model I'd like to see from him, and I just remembered the KTTS. About a week later, he sent me screenshots of the finished tank, and I was like, whoa! That's pretty cool. But at the time I was working on other projects, so the model had to wait for a few months. Make sure to check out their Facebook page in the description because Peter has been releasing some awesome tanks lately, and they're leagues better than this one. They plan to sell physical prints in 1/72nd scale, but they upscaled the model to 1/48 on my request. But fear not, if you want to print it yourself, you actually can, because the print files can be bought on the Aladdin Model website. You'll find the link below as well, and this is an awesome company. I'm actually planning a huge project with them very soon, and I'm even going to be a judge in their 3D model design competition. Check it out, there's yours truly, there's Plasmo, and also Steve, the boss. If you're a 3D modeler, consider entering with your finest work because you can win a pretty hefty amount of cash. They have a voting system on which models should they make, so I highly recommend taking a look around on the site because it offers way more than it might seem at the first glance. Anyway, this is my second fully 3D printed armor model. The first one was the AMX50B from Resin Scales, and one common theme on these kits is the low part count, but the cleanup and preparations take a bit of time. So that pretty much wraps up the assembly with the few improvements that can be done to any model. Moving on to my painting workbench, I broke it down to sub-assemblies, which are like 3, just the way I like it, and I clamped the hull in a new painting stand and quickly degreased it with alcohol. This stand is from War Dog Models. It's fully 3D printed and the compact size makes it quite comfortable to use. Now we can prime the model and see all the details in their full glory. VMS keeps releasing new shades of their primers, and this olive drab tone works pretty well even for a Soviet vehicle. Unlike lacquer-based primers, these work best with wet application, which is somewhere between a light mist and a completely flooded model. Let's now give it a coat of protective 4BO mixed from these paints. I'm continuing with my old school painting techniques, so there's gonna be zero post-shading or color modulation. But this means I need to have a pretty light color mixture right from the get-go, because every weathering technique will make the model darker. So it's always better to start pale. If you start with a dark tone, it'll be extremely hard to lighten it later to your liking. I also wanted to give it a camouflage with a 6K dark brown, which I mixed from these. I've always sprayed my camouflages with my Fengda BD203 and a 0.2mm needle, but this time I'm trying out a brand new AK Precision airbrush with a 0.3 needle. And right off the bat, you'll see that my paint mixture was too thick. The easiest giveaway is the coverage. I can apply the paint in pretty much one layer and call it done, but this means the paint is too thick and it sputters. I realized it too late, but don't worry, I'll show you how to fix it in a moment. Also, in terms of the camouflage, when I'm making them up, I always make a sketch in Photoshop, because if I were to make things up on the fly, it would end very poorly. Anyway, as I said, proper paint dilution is important for smooth color transitions, and I explained in one of the Sturmtiger videos that I don't have any mixing ratios. I do it all by feel. Luckily, with an unshaded base coat, corrections are a breeze, and here I was able to go over the edges with the 4BO mixture and make it all look proper. So when I was done here, I sealed the entire model with VMS satin varnish. I also have links for those if you want to try them out at a lower price, and here I used my old Fengda 0.3mm airbrush because that's what it's good for: priming, varnishing and base coating. Let's now get it all washed up and start with some initial weathering. A global wash is a really fun technique because all you have to do is to just drown the model in extremely diluted oil paint. It acts as a filter, a wash, and a dirt pass all in one smelly package. It's a great example of those pale base coats paying off. Not only will it make the surface a bit darker, it will also unify the different camouflage colors a little and mainly add very subtle stains here and there. There are other things it does, such as reducing the sheen of the varnish, but I'm trying to keep things simple here, okay? I left it to dry overnight, and the next morning I did a round of detailed pin washes. These are much darker, but also way more focused. We're only applying them around the details, and any excess needs to be wiped away, or even better, subtly blended for additional cool effects. What I mean by this is that you don't have to end up with sharply outlined details and nothing more. Instead, you can get subtle shading, additional stains of dirt, and other cool effects. The varnish you used also plays a big role here. A flat surface will make the shading a lot easier, but the paint will bite quicker. Also, a bit of dark sepia, which is a black-brown color, can come in handy on those air intake meshes which are modeled as a solid piece. Let's now switch to a more colorful oil palette. This is the so-called oil dot filter or fading, and again, the previous effect needs at least half a day to fully cure before we proceed. This is basically just slapping oil dots on the surface and then blending them. Of course, you need to pick them according to your base coat. There's no universal recipe for every paint job. Also, note that their placement might seem chaotic at first, but if you look closely, there's some intent. For example, I'm keeping the olive green oils away from the brown parts of the camouflage, and the dark stains are focused in the corners and around details. Blending can be done in a number of ways. However, one thing is for certain. You employ a tapping or stippling motion on the horizontal surfaces, and swiping brush strokes on the vertical or slanted parts. An old, stiff brush is ideal for stippling, and for swiping, a flat brush is needed. But anyway, that's the model after all of the wet techniques have been applied. The intensity of each effect is up to us, and in this case, I ended up with a pretty subtle result. Let's change that with chipping and rust zones. For these steps, we'll change to acrylics, and the first stage, as usual, is sponge chipping with a light zone. I like to get it done as quickly as possible because it's honestly not my favorite method, but it has to be done and it's very time efficient. Pretty much since the beginning I've been using packaging foam from electronics or torn pieces of kitchen sponges for the job, but recently I found a dedicated, so to say, stippling sponge in the art section of one of those cheap dollar stores. And I don't know, but the difference is really noticeable. For the better, of course. However, a sponge can only take you so far, and for extra fineness, I like to switch to oils once again. Mixing a pale green color, I applied with the speckling method using a small stiff brush and an old airbrush needle. These tiny dots will refine the effect and make the surface look busier, representing scuffs from shrapnel and other imperfections. This is the step where you have to trust the process because on its own, it looks quite unsightly, but we'll see how it all works together in the end. Going back to acrylics, we'll now paint the dark steel chips with a gray tone. This is probably the only step in my entire workflow where I follow a precise mixing ratio, which is 4 drops of paint, 3 drops of acrylic drying retarder, and 1 drop of tap water. The steel chipping is one of the slower painting techniques in the process, and you need a lot of patience for it, because for the most of the job, you'll barely see any transformation if you look at the model from afar. When my fiancée returned home from work and when she learned that I spent an entire day in the studio, she looked at the model and was like, "It looks the same way as yesterday." And I gotta say, it's these types of wounds that will not heal. Well, I can certainly see the difference, and we're on a good path here. But let's now slay the finish with rust zones made from oil paints. Oxide patina and dark rust are my two preferable tones, but I usually use one or the other depending on the paint job. At least I don't remember the last time I used them both on the same model in such an extent. The point is that the dark rust color works great on the green camouflage, but the lighter orange tone looks better on the brown spots. Normally, we change the color of the rust depending on its age, but here I just did what looked nice and didn't think much beyond that. In fact, I did pretty much all of the painting with my brain turned off because I approached this model as a palette cleanser. Just something you can have fun with, in line with the original idea of the Weekend Models brand. At this point, we can start to observe how all of the previous layers start to come together. And I'm not just talking about the individual chipping steps, but the whole paint job, washes and everything. However, there ain't too many details that would need to be painted in different colors on this model, so let me quickly sneak in some additional tips and tricks. The exhausts are right there in the open for everyone to see, and as such, they need to stand out nicely. Also, while I had the acrylics at hand, I quickly highlighted the weld beads with a silver color. This is another part of the chipping process for me. If the tank has exposed steel all over the place, the metal welds should be worn out as well. And, going back to oil paints now, I gave the exhaust a heavy rust wash which tied the two contrasting colors together, resulting in a heat-corroded look. Okay, that wraps up some good 2/3 of the entire painting process, and the model is starting to look pretty good. We could definitely leave it like this and keep things extremely clean, but I actually decided that this tank will be quite dirty, so let's give it a try. As usual, we'll start with the ugly parts. Slapping the textured acrylic mud paste from AK is the first step in my workflow, and the only purpose of this is to establish some volume and texture. Artifacts that are painted directly on the model are fine, but they always look better when they have a bit of mass. Some blending with water gets the job done relatively quickly. Now, we'll tie it all together with a bit of pre-dusting using diluted Tamiya buff acrylic. This is why the color of the textured mud doesn't really matter, because we can always adjust it to our specific needs with an airbrush, or subsequently with enamel effects. Speaking of which, let's change up the usual game a little and try adding a bit of pigments into the mixture. This is not a very common method, but I've seen some modelers doing the same thing, and let me tell you, it has lots of benefits. With pigments, you can adjust the tone of the enamel paint, but the main advantages are added texture and matte quality. First of all, this is not the same as adding VMS pigment texture into the paint. The pigment adds little to no volume, but once it dries, it has that microscopic gritty texture. You know, the small difference between what's clearly just an earth-colored paint and something that actually looks like real dust, just scaled down. The same applies to the darker tone. I just use dark matte enamel with some dark colored pigment from AK. And by the way, AK is so kind that you'll find a new discount coupon and an affiliate link down in the video description. A small portion of the sales goes to me, so if you buy something at a discounted price, you're helping yourself to some quality stuff and also helping me. Case in point are these acrylic markers from them, which are super useful for things like polished sections of the track or the wheels. But when you have the tracks and wheels printed as a single unit, your polishing options become a bit limited. So I used a metallic enamel pigment from VMS, which works like a dream. It looks just like polished graphite once it dries. I wanted to enhance them a little further, so after looking at some references, I added a bit of exposed steel on the edges with a dark gray acrylic and a sponge, and once this was done, I polished the edges with a pencil. You can squeeze out a lot of visual interest out of the tracks even if the detail is not absolutely mind-blowing. So with the lower half of the model finished and assembled, we can move on to the upper surfaces and do pretty much the same thing. First of all, yeah, we're gonna use the same tones as on the lower hull, obviously. However, while I was working on the model, I went back and rewatched some of Adam Wilder's KV1 episodes, which came out, 10 years ago. I mean, I thought it was like 5 at most, but anyway. What Adam did on his model was a sort of color modulation with earth tones. Placing the light ones on the outside, towards the lights on his base coat, and darker in the corners where he airbrushed shadows. I don't have those on my model, but I thought it would be an interesting experiment. Needless to say, after testing it out on the mudguards, I saw the potential and it was also fun. Instead of ruining all the contrast with dust effects as usual, and having to reintroduce them later with upcoming effects, I was actually making the model more contrasting as I went along. Also, this might have been caused by the addition of dry pigments into my mixtures, but the results were quite rough once I blended them. But luckily, once the thinner evaporated, I could still manipulate the effect slightly with a stiff, dry brush. On the vertical surfaces, the blending was the same as with oil dots. This might seriously be the first time when a dusty model of mine doesn't look like crap, and if I wanted to, I could call it done, but I don't want to. Another effect Adam added was murky water. I mixed mine from streaking rime and clear wet effects. And okay, this isn't as radical because I've used it this year already. The E100 I've built in the winter is a good example of this method, but I definitely wasn't as bold with it. I pretty much applied the wet stains without any blending, instead relying on my non-existent skill to paint random round shapes that would look like small pools of water or moisture. The point of this method is to break up the smooth dust effects with something that's more defined, but also to enhance the contrast by strategically placing the stains into corners and between individual panels. Let's wrap things up with 2 even more awesome effects. The first one is, of course, the absolutely horrible residue from the exhaust, because this is a diesel Soviet tank after all. After painting the first overall trace with a black enamel wash, I created most of the residue with an airbrush and a flat black Tamiya acrylic. The paint has to be extremely diluted for those smooth transitions. And it's better to build the effect up slowly because it's so easy to overcook it. We can enhance it further with a bit of black pigment applied dry over the surface, and a few black streaks from the exhaust pipes will add a delicate touch to the effect. The other dramatic thing we can do is add some fuel stains around the external tanks. I simply used the same murky water mixture, but added a bit of light rust wash to make it more orange. It's still a glossy translucent concoction, but it has its own specific color now. Finally, I polished the worn edges with a pencil. This effect can take a surprising amount of time, but it's good to stay focused and keep a steady hand. It needs to be done at the very end because enamel thinners would dissolve the graphite, so I always apply it as the final touch. And with that out of the way, I just drilled out the antenna mount with a new hobby blade, superglued a piece of 0.2mm copper wire into the hole, painted it with a pale green color, and gave it a quick enamel wash to tie it with the rest of the model. And with that, my mission was over. Alright, friends, that was a fun project and a totally unique model. Honestly, I didn't give it my 100% because, as I said, it was a palette cleanser and my approach was more relaxed than usual, but I'm still happy with how it turned out. The only bummer is the long gun barrel sagging down like a sad noodle, but Peter told me that in 1/72nd scale, which is their primary focus, the barrels are short enough that this doesn't happen. If I ever design my own tank model for 3D printing, wink wink, I'll definitely use a carbon fiber rod as an insert and make the barrel hollow. Again, go check out Weekend Models on Facebook and show them some love. Go check out Aladdin Model and their contest and vote for what model you'd like to see in their store. Lastly, check out my personal webpage if you'd like. I have all of my models there and most of them are for sale, including this one. And I also have my own humble line of merch, which you'll find along the links in the description as well. I'd like to release one more video before the end of the year, but just in case I don't make it in time, I want to wish you Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, my friends. Thank you for all of the support this year, because without you, I wouldn't be here making these models on YouTube as my daily job. It truly means the world to me. And a special thanks goes to my patrons. Their help allows me to buy resin in large quantities and waste it on excessive amounts of support on my 3D prints. And if you're one of them, thank you so much, because without you, I wouldn't be making these videos for a living, because Patreon is my only steady source of income. So if you join, you'll get a lot of cool stuff. I post regular updates, share work in progress photos, various thoughts and observations from the workbench, and we keep in touch through DMs, comments and emails. Top tier patrons also get early access to all of my videos completely ad-free, and they stay on Patreon forever, so if you'd like to listen to them while you're modeling, now you know where to go. There are also bonus extras like 3D printable parts for your own projects, reference photos from real-life locations, and high-res studio shots of my models that show way more detail than video ever could. Your financial support is appreciated, but never expected. So again, if I don't make the final video of this year in time, I wish you all the best and thank you so much for your support this year. 2026 will be full of big things happening both in my personal life and also with models. I have some extremely epic projects planned for you and I can't wait to show them to you. But in the meantime, remember, build your models, don't just hoard them. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!